Hi BookTube, it's Peg. I am back at the History Shelf. Today I am coming at you with another book review. This time around, it was a joy to revisit this author. I his previous book I reviewed on this channel was in 2019, and it was one of my favorite books of 2019. But this was his new book, put out by Casemate Publishers. And this is Phoenix Rising, From the Ashes of Desert One to the Rebirth of U.S. Special Operations by retired Colonel Keith M. Nightingale. Again, Casemate Publishers. This came out in the summer last year. And the previous book I reviewed by Colonel Nightingale was this fantastic third-person memoir, I guess you would say. This was Just Another Day in Vietnam, and I just fell in love with it. It's not easy reading, but it's realistic. And so I had done a book review on Just Another Day in Vietnam. If you go to my book review playlist, you'll see my review for this book that I did at the end or the beginning. Might have been December of 2019 or January of 2020. That I did that review. But anyway, this is his brand new book. It's only out for about 6 months now. And in case if you don't remember, when I've shown this book a few times on my TBR list and things like that, and I've talked about it. But in case you're not aware of what this is about, let me just I'll read the brief blurb from the beginning. Phoenix Rising recounts the paradoxical birth of Special Operations Forces through the prism of Operation Eagle Claw, the failed attempt to rescue 52 Americans held hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. When terrorists captured the embassy on November 4th, 1979, the Joint Chiefs of Staff quickly realized that the United States lacked the military capability to launch a rescue. There was no precedent for the mission, a mission that came with extraordinary restrictions and required a unique force to take it on. With no existent command structure or budget, this force would have to be built from scratch in utmost secrecy and draw on every branch of the U.S. military. Keith Nightingale, then a major, was Deputy Operations Officer and the junior member of Joint Task Force Eagle Claw, commanded by Major General James Vaught. Based on Nightingale's detailed diary, Phoenix Rising vividly describes the personalities involved, the issues they faced, and the actions they took, from the conception of the operation to its hair-raising launch and execution. His historically significant post-analysis of Eagle Claw gives unparalleled insight into how a very dedicated group of people, from the Chief of Staff of the Army to lower-ranking personnel, subjugated personal ambition to grow the forces necessary to address the emerging terrorist threat. A threat which the majority of uniformed leadership and their political masters denied in 1979. The special operations capability of the United States today is the ultimate proof of their success. And let me just say, I love this book. It was another winner. It's written in a different style than Just Another Day in Vietnam. I'll just to speak to the format of the book before I get into the main highlights and my takeaways from the book itself. It is written in like a diary-like fashion. Like, say, you might begin with in the beginning. And this text right here would be the diary or the journal entry of Colonel Nightingale at the time. But the italics at the front might either be a quote, but most times it's a little bit of the italics would be like a modern day kind of introduction, a look back, and he kind of introduces the topic that he is writing about in his journal for that day or time. And I had selected just a portion just to show you. It starts off fantastic. I don't know how many of you were alive when this happened. I was 7 years old when the hostages were taken. So I just remember, I have, the vague memories of seeing blindfolded men being led through crowded streets with men jumping around them and chanting. And it horrified me, as a child. I didn't understand. But this details that rescue operation that unfortunately failed. But from the ashes of the failure, hence the Phoenix Rising, you know, Colonel Nightingale breaks down through that failure how our special operations forces came to be. And actually, towards the end of the book, he kind of wraps it up very nicely. Talks about how because of that failure, and because of the work we had to do as a bureaucracy, as the military, civilians, we all had to come together, work through differences, work through egos and ambitions, silos, to break down the walls and make sure that we are all working towards the same goal of being able to launch low-intensity, conflict forces into areas that it led eventually, into areas of trouble and violence and hostage situation or targeting a specific terrorist that we need to take out or whatever. This all led up to Osama bin Laden in 2011. So you can see where you start off and you're reading about the failure, and it was a fatal failure, but it resulted in because of things weren't because people weren't really communicating or going along with the game plan as Colonel Nightingale was laying out. There was the helicopter accident that killed 8 crew members. They were heroes. They were on their way to try and take on a rescue operation that had never been done before, which Colonel Nightingale lays out in Phoenix Rising, and really point by point. I mean, he goes through it with a fine-tooth comb. There's a lot of it, like the military. We love our acronyms, so you're going to find a lot of acronyms in here. But I think you can easily follow along to what's happening. But let me just start with how Colonel Nightingale starts the book here. He says, everything we take for granted today in the Special Operations Forces, or SOF, and you're going to see SOF throughout the book, everything we took for granted today in the Special Operations Forces world began with the Iran rescue attempt in 1980-1981 of 52 American hostages being held in Tehran by the Iranian government. Before this issue became a national priority to resolve, special operations, in quotes, was reserved for some small elements within each service that performed discrete, unique tasks outside of the conventional mainspring. They rarely, if ever, worked together in common cause. The hostage crisis changed all that as we came to grips with the operational realities and necessities of the world. In the beginning, with the requirement to rescue the hostages in Iran, the SOF shelf was essentially bare. We had to invent capabilities that heretofore had never existed. In light of what we enjoy today, these initial efforts were quaint at the least and shocking at the worst. Regardless, all that we enjoy today began at this event. And from there, we move into Colonel Nightingale's journal of he kind of goes into briefly how the hostages were taken, when he heard about it, when they started mobilizing, when Major General Vaught was called to command the attempt for the rescue. And as the book indicates, Colonel Nightingale was a major at the time. He was Major Nightingale. And I guess the most junior amongst them. He kind of mentions throughout, I was tasked a lot when we were, having an all-night troubleshooting thing that they'd send me out to get the pizza and the beers, and that was my job to get that taken care of. But they were pulling long hours. They were dedicated to rescuing our hostages. And let's see here. He kind of goes into, he talks about how the staff was selected, who was going to be on board to start mapping out a rescue attempt and what it looked like. He talked about how the intelligence was a real big barrier because there was a difference in belief at the time of what intelligence assets, which intelligence assets were to be preferred as we were moving into a more technological age. People were in high levels of power at DOD or whatnot looked down on human intelligence assets, also known as HUMINT, which is an acronym, HUMINT, HUMINT. But how essential just we needed so badly to have the HUMINT information about, because at the time they didn't know where are they being held, what rooms, I mean, what are the streets around them, where we did not have that, and we weren't finding that type of, interior information. If they're being held in a large building, well, which floors, which rooms, these are the things that they needed insiders for, and we didn't have. So I found that to be very intriguing as Colonel Nightingale was, explaining that. And I found the introduction sections where he's got the italic writing is his, again, him introducing and explaining the context of what we're about to read for that journal entry. Let's see here, our most valuable resources, one journal title, it says, the 32 persons who compose the JTF, the Joint Task Force, work 24/7 with a singular dedication, as well as incredible stress and a deep sense of responsibility. And in the daily journal, you sense and you read a lot of Nightingale's frustration with people who just don't get it, or have an ego issue, or don't want to work outside of their particular service line. And as I was reading it, I was like, whoa, I don't know if you pissed off some people, Colonel Nightingale. I bet he doesn't care neither. He's like, I'm speaking the truth here. I'd like to know. But as the plan progressed and they started getting online, they needed the air support. We needed to have the helicopters. We needed to have the crew to fly the helicopters in. Well, would that be the Navy pilots? Okay, so then we got to go to the Navy pilot and go to the Navy and see if they would assign their assets. And there's a lot of territoriality that you read throughout this that I can see is frustrating to not only Nightingale, Colonel Nightingale, but all the other people just desperately trying to put together something that had never been done before. And, it took a lot of chutzpah, if you will, because, there was a lot on the line. And he also talks about in the book the interactions with his higher-ups with the White House and Jimmy Carter, President Carter. And you know what? I just want to thank Colonel Nightingale for writing this book and for me reading it, because then I realized, I had a wrong impression of President Carter during the hostage attempt. It failed. It did, and 8 servicemen died in the attempt. But he was very adamant that they were going to go, and they were going to go again. He wanted to. But you get, with the revisionist history of sorts, I don't know. I always believed, Reagan was the one that was, they were afraid of Reagan. He got elected, so they let him loose. Well, it's always more complicated than that. And, of course, there was the political side of the Iranian government and Khomeini. Timing it right. It really wasn't anything Reagan did. This was all done under President Carter's purview, and unfortunately, with the failed attempt, which they had to abort after the helicopter crash, he got smeared with this, and it was something he still carries around his neck. But from what I've read in the book, and from what Colonel Nightingale has shown in his journal, as you are there, and what he heard from people who had talked directly to the president, and he's got the inside dialogue and everything. He was a very no nonsense, serious sort, who was also I would say almost hawkish, and like, we're going to go in and get them, and I appreciate that. So I feel bad that I had the wrong information, or I looked down on Carter as being wimpy, but he wasn't. From what I'm reading here, he wasn't. But anyway, so we move into the book in the early days of the Joint Task Force Eagle Claw, and Nightingale's part in it. And, we kind of speed along through these entries. He gives a lot of insight just into the world of how military and civilian and the bureaucracy of it all works together, or most times don't. And here's an example of his frustrations in a journal entry entitled "Who Are We Fighting Here?" His current what he introduces to that journal entry. He says in the early stages of the JTF, we had liaison with the Department of State. Within 2 weeks of this bridge, it was clear that State was increasingly uncooperative for whatever reason and would become a potential OPSEC disaster. That's operational security. And so the journal entry starts off with, "I thought we were on the same team. I am clearly wrong. Since the beginning of the planning, we have had discussions with knowledgeable folks from State. It is their employees who are hostages. And we, the military, are working to bring them back. So this is perfectly natural." For whatever reason, this has significantly changed. And then later down he says, "The good news is that we got the architectural drawings for the embassy compound primarily from the CIA, which owns an internal complex. I thought we were one country with one fight. Obviously naive." So, he doesn't, his journal's very honest, he pulls no punches. Let's see, and then again he talks in another section here, he's talking about the intelligence community. And he has quotes around community. As you can see, that's kind of a sore point. The intelligence community has several problems. An asset, if inserted, may be found. There may be no person capable of doing the job. Most have been fired or retired. And his existence may be compromised for a project of dubious worth, and his long-term value to the community destroyed. These problems are noted by the general. He has several questions that he must answer. Where are the hostages? How are they guarded? Who guards them? Machines can't answer these questions. Like the luck of Roaring Camp, man is the weakest and yet the strongest link. And that's his basically saying we need the human intelligence. What else do we go into here that is really just fascinating? There was so much planning involved. And again, they were working 24/7. And people kind of forget that even in failure, though, there was so much heart. And it really pulled a number on the people involved. They were really heart and soul involved in this rescue attempt, working. And then to lose the eight service members in that accident. It was called Desert One. That was the attempt. It didn't get very far. And there's a documentary that I'm dying to see, and I don't know how I can get it just yet, but I think it's called Desert One. And there's a trailer of it on YouTube. If you just put in like Desert One official trailer. But it looks like it should have come out at the late summer last year. But I need to find out, because I'd like to see that and see how this jibes with what Colonel Nightingale has written here. But anyway, as we move into this is the part which to me was a little controversial. But I would love to pick Colonel Nightingale's brain on this. I do wonder if he's going to hear from anyone from like the people that he has called out, whether indirectly or directly. If they have any response or rebuttal. He says that there was a main failure with. I'm not trying to stir up any hornet's nests here, but Colonel Nightingale's in the Army, so. They had a problem with the Navy, or a specific commander of the Navy, where I guess the Navy crew that they had first wrangled up to be the pilots were not very cooperative, and there was some rivalry going on, and people looking down their noses at other services and stuff like that. But the interesting thing to come out of this, and I don't know if this has been reported on in other books about the topic of the Iran hostage rescue attempt, how many books have been written on that, I don't even know. I should look into that. But the safety testing that they needed to run on these helicopters that were going to be used for the attempt, they were supposed to be stressed for a certain amount of time, like 8 to 9 hour flights or something like that. And that wasn't done by the Navy. So that's kind of damning. So I'm curious to know if that ever was addressed anywhere. Whether after the event, I know that they did have a commission. I think it was the Holloway Commission, or was that part of it? There was a really detailed section at the back that's very useful, talking about all the different hearings, the commissions, and then just the governmental, what happened up on Capitol Hill and the hearings to get the Pentagon, all those people together to get on the same page and to realize that, the day of marching into battle with just armies and a fleet of airplanes is over. We need to have special operations forces ready to go, nimble, that can collaborate and work in and in between the different services and have, a certain person or a certain entity that's in charge of that and making decisions rather than having to hop around these different silos. And, that's just, how red tape and bureaucracy can get after a while. I mean, so that section towards the back where he gets into the aftermath and the path forward, was fantastic. Then there's some moving entries he has as well. He's a very artistic writer. He's a very soulful man, from what I have gathered from his writing. And he kind of paints a picture of just the pathos of it all too. And there's a real tough entry on the one that's called "The Face of the Enemy," page 176. And it's, the scene of the Iranians celebrating over the wreckage, and pulling a trophy out of the wreckage. And I won't tell you what that was, but again, I really enjoyed reading this. I made notes throughout. And, he has a section on reflections and conjecture. He says, this book has traced from a single perspective a number of instances where some people and some of the uniformed services and agencies did not provide what could be called full cooperation and support, and that this was one of the most important things the nation was doing at the time. Rescuing our citizens, why did this occur? What follows is personal speculation on my part, but I believe it is reasonably accurate. So I had flagged this page. So overall, and please know that this entire book, I think, is please pick it up if you can, if you find it, and you're interested in military history and the history of, operations, or even just in the general history of how you learn from failure, how organizations and institutions can learn from failure, just from even a leadership perspective, would be useful to read this book. And it's extremely well written and very funny at times. But overall, his basic takeaways is that from the beginning of the planning, there were 5 obstacles to the success of the operation. Number 1, most of the service principals, less General Meyer, were convinced that the plan would not be approved and were convinced that if approved, the operation would be a failure. As such, they were not willing to commit resources and risk beyond the very essential and directed. And number 2, there is a culture within most bureaucratic organizations to zealously protect their own turf, it's true, with minimal sharing of personnel and assets or assumption of responsibility. Number 3, the logical and correct great concern regarding OPSEC severely limited the ability of the JTF to acquire assets or train. The lack of a formal budget line was particularly limiting, it talked about that in the blurb for the book. Number 4, there was a failure of leadership at the top of the civilian side. So he's just calling it right out there. Okay. Yeah, well, this time he kind of does call in the hands. He says Secretary of Defense and POTUS, knowing how the bureaucracy was reacting, as well as the daily impact on the JTF efforts, could have taken a more active role in forcing compliance and support. So that's a valid, definitely valid point. I mean, Carter wasn't completely faultless here. I'm just saying I think he gets more, or has gotten more blame for it than might be fair. But, the buck stops here, so. And then number 5, one of his last overall reflections is the constant start-stop of the program throughout its existence marred credibility and attracted a non-supporting attitude. People outside the JTF just did not believe the raid would ever be approved. Hence, they felt free to selectively ignore or lowball support and assets. And we were all... I was in the military once, and what he's about to say here, it rings a bell. We were always on a, quote, get ready to go in 10 days, end quote, to a stand down roller coaster ride. That happened a lot in the military. Didn't matter what unit you were working with, what kind of work you were doing. That's very true. And then he details the Central Intelligence Agency's role, his perspective on their role in it, good or bad. Then he talks about the U.S. Navy. So Colonel Nightingale, I'd love to know. Send me an email. I'd love to know if you've gotten any blowback from any, colleagues. I'm just curious to know how they're reading the book and seeing how they kind of fare, or if they have anything to say about it. And he talks about the Air Force, the commanders in chiefs, also known as the CINCs, C-I-N-C, the CINCs. State Department, which he did not have a favorable view of at all. And then the bottom line, which is, today we enjoy Special Operations Forces and their extraordinary capabilities as a matter of course. But in 1980, there were no proven capabilities, but a dire requirement. The JTF had to plow the hard original ground, expose the issues, and have Congress later create a quality playing field for the SOF, using the scars of Iran as the building blocks. Yes, the Holloway Board. That was the name of the investigation into the failure, I believe. It was an investigation. That's right. Okay, so the last thing, I wanted to point out the one thing at the end that talks about what happened with Osama bin Laden. I just had it flagged here to read to you real quick. In closing, but I love the book. I'm hoping Colonel Nightingale will pen another soon. So in the final entry of the book, I'm not going to read the whole page because I really want you guys to go out and read this. Phoenix Rising. It's outstanding. From the Phoenix to the product. On May 1st, 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed by a Special Operations Force, probably the only force that could have achieved such an outcome. This was not the end of the rise of SOF as a valued part of the defense establishment, but it was, as Churchill stated, surely the end of the beginning. The disaster of Desert One worked as the catalyst that made the outcome of May 1st possible. All the aspects and elements that grew out of Project Honey Badger were physical contributors to the assault force success. SOF intelligence elements pinpointed with exceptional accuracy the location of the target personality. It kind of goes down, gives a little more detail, but in conclusion, the forces and capabilities that have been created, while represented by the Osama bin Laden strike, were underwritten by the Americans who perished at Desert One, and we should always remember them. The operational successes post-Osama bin Laden are partially but not completely known, and that is a good thing. Exposure is not a benefit for such people or programs. That which has been exposed illustrates that the Iran rescue attempt was truly a good thing. Lives were lost, but lessons were learned, and something good eventually came out of it. But, I cannot recommend highly enough Phoenix Rising, From the Ashes of Desert One to the Rebirth of U.S. Special Operations. Check it out. Also check out Colonel Nightingale's other book, Just Another Day in Vietnam. A riveting account of an ambush that he, as an advisor to the 52nd Ranger Battalion, South Vietnamese Ranger Battalion, got caught in, and the battle scenes are true and harrowing and viscerally gut-wrenching. But he writes everything with a sense of he's got a little, he kind of rises above a little bit, and he seems to write with a detached eye that sees both the ridiculous, the sublime, the horrible, and he writes it in a very accessible, Joe Q. Public, type of way, and I love his work. I really hope he keeps cranking these out. So anyway, guys, thanks for listening to my long ramble here, but it was a great book, and I really enjoyed it. So we'll talk to you guys soon, and have a good one, BookTube.